And Andrew, I guess it's time to introduce you. Andrew has been the professor of youth and family ministries at Luther Seminary in St. Paul, Minnesota since 2005. He has written quite prolifically books about the state of the church and the future of the church. And so, Andrew, welcome to the stage at Sepulveda.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Thank you. All right, can you hear me? Is this, we're good? All right, great. Well, it's great to be here and to be your dinner entertainment for tonight. There will be no dancing or singing, but I do have a big why question for us to wrestle with this evening. And this is the why question. Why are people leaving the church? Or maybe we can also kind of think of that as another why question of why is congregational life just so hard right now? Now, I don't know if you're like me, but I hate when people pose questions and then say, in an hour, I will answer this question. I find that deeply, deeply annoying. So we are just going to answer this question right now. Why people are leaving the church or why congregational life right now is so difficult is because of the secular. So that's it. We're finished. Thank you very much for coming. All right. Yeah, thank you. All right. All right, so here's the problem. To say the answer to anything is the secular, it only takes just a bit of thinking to realize that is a very complicated word. What do we mean when we say the secular? So what I want to do with about my hour of time is unfold that word a bit and try to get a handle on what we mean or what we should mean when we say the secular. And I actually think there's a lot at stake, that if we have the wrong definition of the secular, even over and against our best intentions, we may make matters worse. So there's something really at stake with us getting a handle on what we mean by the secular. So to do this, to unfold this word, I need to tell you a bit of a story, and I need to tell you a bit of a historical story. So we need to go back in time. I asked to have a time machine here, but was told we can't go 88 miles an hour outside of the church. We can't, and the flex capacitor seems to be broken or something. So we're not going to be able to use the time machine, so you're going to have to do this in your imagination. But I want you to go back with me. Let's go back to the 14th century, and let's leave North America. Let's go to Paris, and let's walk the Latin Quarter of Paris. If we were walking the Latin Quarter of Paris on the left bank in the 14th century, we would be in a society where there was no secular. There was no such thing as the secular. Now, people weren't ignorant or dumb. They knew, for instance, when they went to the cathedral, that the priest and the wine was, the chalice it was in, that it was a holy thing. And they knew when they went home to their farms that the shovel or the hoe that they used was a profane thing. By profane, I don't mean bad or gross. I simply mean not used in holy activity. They knew the difference between all those things, but for the most part, they all clicked together. They all formed one kind of whole cloth. They all fit together. And in these kind of societies, it all fit together in such a way that it was very hard not to believe. Belief was just everywhere, and it was perpetuated by everything. The way you talked, the way you dressed. As a matter of fact, it was nearly impossible to live in one of these societies and not believe in God. We really didn't have a word for not believing in God. Like the word atheist didn't really exist. As a matter of fact, this is a statue that exists in Venice, Italy right now. You can find it off the Grand Canal in Venice. And it is a statue of a man named Paolo Sarpi. Now, I don't know if you know the name Paolo Sarpi. If you want an interesting, boring fact about Paolo Sarpi was the dissenting voice at the Council of Trent. All right, you're getting very tired right now. What's more interesting about Paolo Sarpi is that Paolo Sarpi was Galileo's friend. So he is the person who encouraged Galileo to write his book that the earth moves around the sun, not the sun around the earth, that got Galileo in very hot water with the church and particularly with the Jesuits in Italy. But like I said, you can find this statue today, and if you find it off the Grand Canal, you will see that it sits on a pedestal, and on that pedestal is a plaque. And on that plaque, it reads a quote. It says, Paolo Sarpi, date of birth, date of death. And then there's a quote in Italian. So either you'll need to be able to speak Italian, or you'll need to find a hunky Italian man to translate it for you. So I've now just given you a pickup line. If you needed one, you now have it. But this is what it says in Italian. It says, Paolo Sarpi, the only unbeliever of his generation. That is remarkable. And I've taken you back to the 14th century. Paolo Sarpi is the early 16th century. If you died in the early 16th century and you didn't believe, you got a statue. I mean, that's pretty amazing. Now, I don't know how the traffic's going to be around Pittsburgh with the draft and everything, but my guess is if there was a statue for every unbeliever in Pittsburgh, well, you'd have to put them on the freeways, and the traffic would be even worse. I mean, it's a crazy thing for us to imagine, but it was very hard to not believe. Now, I only know one thought experiment that's tried to imagine what it would be like to be us, late modern people, and go all the way back and have a society where the dial of the secular is set at 0. I only know one thought experiment that's tried to imagine what that would be like. And it's become a very famous dystopian piece of literature turned into a TV series called The Handmaid's Tale. I don't know if you've seen The Handmaid's Tale or read the book. The series is based off a book written in 1982 by a Canadian author named Margaret Atwood. And what Margaret Atwood imagines is that America has been taken all the way back to secular 0. That a very far-right religious group has come, taken control, and renamed what used to be America Gilead, and has taken them all the way back. And if you've watched the first 2 seasons of this, you know it is quite haunting. I mean, it is in dystopian genre, is the genre of this novel and this TV series. And if you watch a TV series, you know you get these kind of shivers down your back as these women have to enact the liturgy everywhere they go. The liturgy doesn't just exist in the place of worship, it is in every part of society. So when they go into the supermarket, they have to enact the liturgy. They have to say, under his eye, or may the Lord open. What they wear, their very clothes they wear, signals their station before God, that there is no space where belief isn't everywhere and knit into their lives. And it is frightening. It is deeply frightening. And Margaret Atwood thinks it's an absolute nightmare. It's a nightmare that you could be modern and go all the way back to this. Now, she thinks it's a nightmare because to live in a secular 0 world, you have to have at least 3 things. 3 things I'm not so sure we have now. And the first thing you have to have is a deep sense that the world is an enchanted place. That there are devils and demons everywhere, that there are angelic forces at play, and they are doing things. They are making things happen. You have to have an imagination where you assume that it is enchanted. The magic is still in the world. There are forces at play. Secondly, you have to have a deep sense that things that you could touch or you could feel could be imbued with either a divine force or an evil force. And of course, if you touch those things or get near those things, the radiation of its goodness or its evil could get inside you. Your very self is porous, even being near those things, that those things could get inside of you and do something to the very essence of your being. Now, there's a historian at Oxford named Keith Thomas who wrote this great book called Religion and the Decline of Magic. And he tells a story in it that I think is really fascinating, and you can see all these at play within it. He said in the 13th century, there was a big controversy going around the church in England. And the controversy was that they discovered people were going to the cathedral to take the Eucharist. They were having the host put on their tongue, and they were holding it in their mouth. That people were not chewing it and swallowing it. They were holding it in their mouth. They were leaving the cathedral. They were going home, and they were feeding it to their sick pig. They were taking it out of their mouth, crumbling it up, and putting it on their fields. Not because they were denigrating it, not because they were trying to disrespect it. They held it to have ultimate respect and ultimate power. They thought, well, if we need this pig to survive so my kids can live, why not feed a little of Jesus' flesh to the pig? If we need a better crop yield this year than we had last year when we almost all starved to death, why not put a little Jesus' flesh in the soil? Well, you can imagine bishops, cardinals, priests, very, very uncomfortable with this, very concerned. So they called a meeting, and everyone came to it. I don't know what the email blast was that advertised this meeting. You know, it's something like, come to lecture series. This month's topic, how to get people to swallow the host. People are like, I got to go to that. I mean, the whole future of the church is dependent on this. We got to go. So people walked for days and days and days, came to the meeting. They figured, what are we going to do with this? Someone raised his hand. They called on him, and he said, well, I have an idea. Why don't we make people stick out their tongues and show us that they've swallowed this? Well, now if you've watched an Italian or Irish gangster movie that is either a Scorsese movie or made to be like a Scorsese movie, there is always a scene where mob boss or soon-to-be mob boss has their daughter's first communion and is also the very time they decide to kill all their enemies. So you get first communion with montage of murders, and of course you get the symbolism of spilled blood, but you see it, mob boss goes front to the altar, hands go behind back, tongue goes out, only the priest can touch the host goes on tongue, swallows it, and then like a 4-year-old with a sore throat at the doctor's office, has to show the priest that they've swallowed this. In some Catholic communities, this is held on since the 13th century. Well, the other thing they did is ramp up the rhetoric. And they reminded people, if you misuse the host, well, this is the most holy thing we have in all in Christendom. If you misuse the host, you'll burn in hell forever. Well, for the next 100 years, it became church law that you had to take communion twice a year. And most people took it twice a year. They were absolutely frightened of what would happen. But it was better than the alternative, which is if you didn't take it, then you would burn in hell forever. So they did it. They risked it. They took it. Now, I have a son who is a junior in college. He's 20 years old. And I have to tell you, and I know this is being recorded, so I want this on the record, that he is a beautiful boy, wonderful kid, and we are very thankful that a certain fever has broken in his life. But basically from 11 to 17, he was a pain in the butt. I mean, a real pain in the butt, and a major contrarian. I mean, if I were to say, what a beautiful blue sky, this kid would argue against me. It was a rough 6 or 7 years raising this boy. You probably know what this is like. Have had one of those kids maybe in your house. Well, we had an experience where we took communion in our church, a small Presbyterian church that my wife is the pastor of in South Minneapolis. We had this beautiful moment when we take communion. We are small enough that we can all stand up, stand in a circle, words of institution go over the elements, a basket of bread is passed, a cup behind it, and we have this moment where we can turn to the person next to us, say their name, and give them the elements. Beautiful moment. Well, this particular Sunday, my son's probably 16, 17, and the basket of bread starts being passed. And we're at about 6 o'clock in this circle, and it's being passed counterclockwise. And he leans over to me and he says, kind of in a stage whisper, he goes, "Hey, is that bread? Is that bread gluten-free? Is that gluten-free bread?" Now, you need to know that this boy hates everything gluten-free. He can't stand gluten-free. He hates the texture. He thinks it's a scam, gluten-free. I don't know by who. Big Bread, I guess, did this. I don't know. But this boy hates gluten-free. So I know this is going to be a problem. So I just don't even look at him. I just nod and say, yeah, it's gluten-free. This is what this kid does. In a louder stage whisper, he goes, "Well, then I'm out," and turns around and walks out of church. All right, so this is a confession. I know this is being recorded, so this is a confession. I want you to know it took everything in me to not tackle the boy and beat him in front of the church this particular Sunday. But think of that different imagination, that utterly different imagination of a medieval person shaking with fear when they come to take communion, to my 16, 17-year-old son being like, gluten-free, don't care for the texture, and this will really annoy my mother, so I'm out of here. Very different kind of imagination at play. Now, when you live in a secular zero age, pastoral ministry, or even the life of the congregation, what it becomes all about is really this deep sense of access, giving people access. They come to church for access to the Holy Sacrament, access to freedom out of the demonic into the holy. It becomes all about access. Now, I tell you all this because whatever the secular is, whatever we mean when we say we live in a secular age, whatever the secular is, it is the child of this kind of society. It comes out of this kind of society. It is born in a society or out of a society where belief used to be everywhere in everything. You couldn't escape it. You just lived in this tightly knit fabric, this tightly knit web of belief. You couldn't escape it. Well, the secular arrives when an incredible change happens. An incredible change happens in our imagination. We don't even think of it as incredible because we live with it. It's common to us. So it arrives in what we might call secular one. And secular one arrives when there becomes this divide in our imagination, that we presume this divide in our world, this idea that there is a public reality and there is a private reality. When we start to live with a public-private divide, we enter into the possibilities of a secular age, and we live into a very new kind of imagination, a new way of even seeing ourselves. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, remember, it was your mother or your grandmother or an aunt or an uncle who taught you that when you go to a dinner party, that there are 4 topics you should never talk about at a dinner party. Remember that? That they told you when you go to a dinner party, don't ever go up to someone and say, hey, nice to meet you. Hey, tell me, how much money do you make? Don't ask people how much money they make. Don't do that. Second thing you're not supposed to talk about is politics, right? You are not supposed to ask people about their political affiliation. Hard for us in our time because politics has become entertainment, so it's like, well, what else do you talk about? But you were not supposed to talk about politics. Third thing I think has held on. Third thing you were not supposed to talk about is sex. You'd be at a very weird dinner party if you met someone, they said, well, just tell me a little bit about your sex life. I mean, that'd be very, very strange. You may want to leave that party if that's the party you're at. But then the fourth thing you were not supposed to talk about was religion, right? So there are the 4 topics: money, politics, sex, and religion. Why were those the 4 topics you were not supposed to talk about? The reason was that those are presumed to be private things. And polite people do not talk about private things in public. Now, when we enter into this world where we assume belief is a private thing, we enter into a very different world. A very different imagination of our lives, of what religious communities are, when we start to live with this imagination of the difference between what is public and what is private. And it upends things. It upends enchantment, things being imbued with the divine force, the self being porous. And in its place, we get different things, like wills. Now what's important, and when we talk about belief, we think about things like, what do you will? What do you hold to? What do you believe in the sense of what do you will? Do you will it? And you can hear the echoes of Martin Luther here say, here I stand, I can do no other. Belief is this sense, it's not purely rational, but it's a sense of do you consent to it? Do you hold to this? Now, let me show you a video clip that might illustrate this and show us the very difference between maybe secular 0 in this world. Now remember, this was a few years ago, I think right around the time of the pandemic, maybe right before it. Remember when we got word on social media that Notre Dame in Paris was on fire? Do you remember this? And then it became one of the most annoying days on social media because everyone had to post their picture of them at Notre Dame. So it's like, we get it. You studied abroad in 1988, and you too went to Notre Dame. It's what the kids call a flex. You were trying to say, I've been to Paris once too. But remember that? All right, so this is the news story the evening after it. And I want you to listen to the woman who talks about it. She's the dean of the Episcopal Chapel in Paris at the time. And I want you to listen to how she talks about this. And I show you this not because I think she's wrong or to critique her. I think she's absolutely right. But it's a very different imagination than the one we just saw in secular 0. So about 30 seconds.
The word is dean of the American Cathedral in Paris.
It's brought out in all of us how much we care, not just about the building, which is gorgeous and historic, but about what it stands for. Paris, France, Europe, the world, tradition, Christian faith at its finest. Christian faith that endures.
The dean is grateful that so many relics survive.
The relics are important, whether or not it really was Jesus' crown of thorns, for instance. Who knows? What's important is that it was a focus of faith, a focus of people's prayers for hundreds of years. So the things themselves are not so important as what they stand for, what they mean to people, the faith they evoke.
I'm present, precisely.
All right, so you hear it. It's almost as if she's a paid actor to say exactly what I want her to say. She illustrates this point beautifully. She's not, by the way. But she illustrates this point beautifully. She says, okay, Jesus' crown of thorns. Is it really Jesus' crown of thorns? I mean, is it really, really Jesus' crown of thorns? I mean, I don't even that is a very modern question. Like, what would verify that it really is Jesus' crown of thorns? I think it would, I would need some kind of scientific verification, maybe a DNA test, but I'm not sure how you would do that. But that would verify it to me, or maybe some kind of like Pawn Stars way of knowing how there was some historical connection or something. I would need something like that. Even verification of what's real is very different. For instance, in like secular zero imagination, do you know how Helena, Constantine's mother, found the true cross that Jesus Christ was crucified on? How she found the real one? Well, what she did is she went to Jerusalem. She went to where Jesus was crucified. There was just stacks of wood everywhere. She took with her, the story goes, a man with leprosy. And she just kept picking up boards and touching it to the man with leprosy. And the one that healed him of his leprosy was the true cross Jesus was crucified on, and she took it back to Constantinople, and they had the true cross. I have to tell you, I want to believe that. I want to. Very hard for me as a modern person to believe that. But it's even a very different sense of what verifies what's real. So she says, is it really? Is it really, really Jesus' crown of thorns? What's fascinating, she actually says, doesn't really matter. Doesn't really matter if it is or it isn't. Not in some kind of nihilistic way. It doesn't really matter, she says, because what matters is the way it inspired people. What matters is that people for hundreds of years have been moved to pray with it. And you can see a change in the gravity. The gravity isn't in the thing anymore. The gravity is in us. So it doesn't matter what the thing is. What matters is it inspired people to hold to something. It inspired people to practice something. So the movement here is you start to enter into a secular age when the kind of gravity or weight of belief goes from what's outside to what's inside. What I hold to, what I believe. This becomes a very different kind of imagination. To illustrate that, we get another incredible change where we move from living in what we could call a cosmos to living in a universe. So let me show you one of my favorite pranks I like to do to a room full of pastors. So if you were all a group of pastors here, and imagine this is a pastor's conference, this is a prank I love to play on people, is I say to this room full of pastors, I say, do you remember this date? March 3rd, 2026. Do you remember this? And I say, remember this? Of course, all you pastors here remember this because you never did more pastoral care calls the week before this and the week after this. This is a picture of the super red blood moon that had just happened. And I say, of course you remember this. Some of you actually are going into a panic when I show you this because you were so busy. I mean, you were doing like 14 hours a day of just pastoral care calls. Remember that? People were texting you and emailing you. It's a fun prank because all of these pastors start looking at each other and going, I wasn't busy. Were you busy? What's wrong with my ministry? Is there something wrong with me? They keep on kind of sizing each other up. No pastor was busy. But you can imagine they were busy doing other things. I should be clear about that. But no pastor was overwhelmed doing pastoral care calls. But you could imagine in a different kind of imaginary they could have been. People could have been calling and saying, Pastor, I need a half hour of your time. I need to talk. I just interviewed for a job. And if I take it, I'm moving the family to Chicago. But now there's a super red blood moon. What is God trying to tell me? Or, Pastor, we're trying to have a baby, but now there's a super red blood moon. Is it safe to have a baby or is it not? Or, Pastor, I was just going to put all my 401k and put it, in more aggressive moves within the market. But now there's a super red blood moon. Should I do that or should I not? No one called and asked that question because our assumption, of course, is not that we live in a cosmos. We're in a cosmos, even the natural phenomena speaks. The change in the weather, a weird light across the sky, there's a deep message within it. But we don't live in a cosmos anymore. We live in a universe. And in a universe, we know exactly what these are. I mean, we have mathematical equations. You can Google super red blood moon next time, and it will tell you the date the next one's going to come. So essentially, when you live in a universe, it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't really mean anything at all. Even the natural phenomenon doesn't mean anything. Now, some of you would say, like, well, wait a minute. No, you don't understand. I got up and I watched this happen. I saw the super red blood moon, and I saw the super red blood moon, and when I saw it, I knew there was a God who created the world. I knew, I had a deep sense of love and awe. It moved me. The reality is, however, that there could have been the person who got up at the same time with you, stood and watched it and gone, that's great for you. Does nothing for me. I'm going back to bed. So even the natural phenomenon, even going up in the mountains or seeing a sunset in the Hawaiian Islands, it might speak to you. But it will only speak to you because you appropriate it internally. Because it comes to mean something to you. There's nothing objective about it that's trying to tell a larger story unfolding that isn't even about you, that's out there. Everything will have to be appropriated internally. So what this shifts us towards as we think about the church, the congregation, the future, is when you start to live in a secular one world, what becomes really important for the church, and even what the pastor does, is the church itself becomes a place of demonstration. It becomes a place of demonstration. So think about the pastor in this way. So the pastor becomes, remember thinking public-private divide, the pastor becomes a public person who does a public act, preach a sermon, deliver a Bible study. But that public act as a public person is thrown out, if you will, is spoken out, the sermon, to private people who sit in their pews essentially as private people, who have their beliefs as private people. And somehow that sermon has to be good enough or engaging enough or well done enough that it can cross the boundary as a public act and get inside people's private constitutions of belief. It has to kind of change the way they understand themselves and their world, but it has to kind of go internal into them. But how would you ever know? I mean, I think pastors feel this. They feel a sense of kind of not knowing if it makes any difference at all. How would you know that the public act was making the public act that was going into the private was making any impact? Well, it would complete the circuit, because the congregation would then become the place, the church would become the place where you go to demonstrate publicly what you privately believe. So if you've been moved by the sermons or the confirmation you went to as a young person, then that's changed your internal constitutional beliefs. What you do is you go to church and you demonstrate that by becoming a member, by pledging to give money, by teaching Vacation Bible School and volunteering. So the best church, if you would, we can put that in quotes, the best church is the church that has the most people demonstrating that what they privately believe. They have the most volunteers and the most members and the most programs going on that people are invested in. But there is vampire logic to this. Do you remember? I'm a big TV guy. TV raised me, so I kind of feel like I owe it 6 hours a night, you know what I mean? Like if you had an aunt who raised you, you would be very thankful. This is why I turn off the TV at night and hug the TV and kiss it and thank it for another great day. But so I watch a lot of TV. I tell myself it's for research, but it's not really for research. But you remember about a decade ago, every show we were watching was sexy vampires? Do you remember? Every show was about vampires. I'm not a vampire guy, but I watched a lot of sexy vampire shows because I watch a lot of TV. And what I learned from all the sexy vampire shows I watched is that there's a vampire logic that says, I don't know why this exists, but that a vampire is not allowed to enter your house. They are not allowed to cross the threshold of your house unless you invite them in. If you invite the vampire in, if you say, hey, sexy vampire, nice to see you, come on into my house, then they can suck your blood, eat you, and turn you into a vampire. But if you don't invite them in, there's some force field they cannot cross into your private space. That logic exists for pastors as well. The pastor, as a public person who speaks to private people, people's private lives, the pastor is not allowed into it. They try it. The pastors in this room, try it Sunday. Go up to someone and say, I've been noticing the way you've been raising your 14-year-old. Don't like it. Don't think you're doing a good job raising your child. And you will quickly get people that say, excuse me, Pastor, that is none of your business. Now, we all know it could be that the 14-year-old is going through a crisis and the family needs help, and they may invite the pastor into that. But they have to be invited in. This public-private divide is a very kind of strong reality. But it clicks forward for us, and I think it gets even closer to our time a bit. And it clicks forward into what we will call secular 2. And this public-private reality gets intensified. It gets intensified in a significant way where we start to feel, well, there's almost a battle between religious spaces and a-religious spaces. It starts to feel like a-religious spaces just keep growing and growing in our society, and religious spaces keep shrinking and shrinking. I mean, one primary example is we just think youth sports. It just keeps growing in the time, the interest, the commitments of families in our communities, and church involvement keeps shrinking. So we start thinking what it means to live in a secular age is that the religious space keeps shrinking and the a-religious space keeps growing. I mean, we're seeing church membership go down, and people are more interested in all sorts of other things. So this becomes the kind of classic way we start to define the secular. This is pretty much the way the media always defines the secular. And we define the secular as something like fewer and fewer people are going to church. Our religious institutions are weaker and weaker. I mean, my goodness, some of our seminaries have closed. My goodness, some of our congregations have been turned into event centers with wonderful food in them. See, here is a mark of the secular, that even churches and denominations had to sell off buildings, and they've all become high-end lofts in urban areas. This is a reality of the secular. So we start to think that this is the loss of this space. So I have a former student who's a friend of mine, pastor of a large church in Minneapolis, about a 500-member church outside in the suburbs of Minneapolis. And he called me up one day and said, I got to tell you, I did a terrible thing. And he told me it's okay if I tell you this terrible thing he did. And it is not good. What he did, and you should never do this, the one thing he did that he's really ashamed of is that he Googled his own church. Don't ever Google your church. He then did the worst thing, is he saw that his church had Google reviews. I don't know if you know this, but you basically can Google review anything in the world. I think if we wanted to, we could Google review this mic stand right now. You can Google review anything. And he noticed, he never told Google they could review his church, but there it was. His church had 9 Google reviews. Then he did the worst thing. Don't ever do this. Don't ever do this. Do never read Google reviews about your church. Well, he did. And they were all positive. He thought he could get away with it because it had like 4.8 stars out of 5, and he thought, I could use some affirmation. And they all really were positive. The first one said, we love this church. The carpets are always clean at this church. 5 stars. Second one said, we love this church. We feel safe putting our child in the nursery. This church is committed to sanitizing the nursery toys on a regular basis. 5 stars. The third one said, we love this church, worth our 25-minute drive. Sometimes the preaching makes us laugh. 5 stars. And on they went. He said, as he read each one, he got more and more of a sinking feeling because he realized they were all written in the exact same format as an Airbnb review. They were all about the amenities. And this becomes our issue, that if we think, I think this is actually our red herring, that we think what our issue is and what it means to live in a secular age is that fewer and fewer people are coming to church. Fewer and fewer people are interested in our classic forms of religion. This is what it means to live in a secular age. We think that. And then we think that what it means is we have to move from demonstrate to participate. that the best church and the best pastors will win more and more participation. That people are leaving the church because they can't find reasons to stay. There's not enough goods there that they can extract that have value for them to stay. So we start thinking, what can we do? What can we do to get more and more people to stay? How can we may not be this crass, but we start to wonder, how can we get a little bit more market share? How can we get more market share? And the best congregation and the best pastor will be able to win a little bit more market share away from the a-religious space for the religious space. Now, hear me. This is an issue. It is an issue. There is just no doubt that this is an issue. I teach at a denominational seminary. We are very aware if the denomination loses another 10, 15, 18% of membership, I mean, it's hard to justify how many seminaries the denomination has now. Is it going to need those seminaries if it loses another 18% of its membership? This is an issue. Most churches, and I mean most churches in America, are one roof leak away that they were not prepared for, and they will not recover. Most churches are there. So let's not be kind of Pollyanna-ish and think this isn't an issue. It most definitely is an issue. If you are a pastor or an elder in this room and you need to keep the half-time nursery worker employed and she is basically only working so her mother can have her medication and pay for her mother's medication, it really matters that there is enough money there available to keep this person hired. I get it. It's a big deal. But I don't think it's actually what it means to live in a secular age. I don't think what it means to live in a secular age is just that fewer and fewer people are coming to church. I think what it means to live in a secular age, and you're going to be shocked by this, is something we can call secular 3. No one saw secular 3 coming after secular 2, did you? You did see it? All right, so you have a lot of seculars in your mind. So if secular 1 is this reality of this new imagination that there's a public and private divide in our imagination, and if secular 2 is the sense that fewer and fewer people are coming to church, then what is secular 3? This is secular 3. Secular 3 is the reality that all belief, all forms of belief become contested. Or maybe a more poetic way to say that is you live in a secular 3 age when all forms of belief become fragile. They become fragilized. You live in a secular age when all belief becomes fragile. Now, in this kind of secular age, to live in a secular 3 age and a fragilization of belief, it means there's both a positive and a negative. But don't think of that as like a good thing and a bad thing. Think of it like a battery, that there's a plus and a minus, and you have to have the plus and the minus lined up in the remote control to get it to work. It's all I know about electrical engineering right there, is the plus and the minus must be lined up. But to get it to operate, it does that. Secular 3 operates with a similar plus minus, positive negative charge. The negative charge of secular 3 is that transcendence as an overall meaning system becomes more and more unbelievable to people. And not even as a confession, that there are fewer and fewer people actually who feel any kind of connection to like the evangelistic atheists. The new atheism has not found much of an audience anymore. It is dissipating. And yet we still live in a society where people can say this. They can actually articulate that they can go long periods forgetting about God. Just forgetting that God exists, forgetting that there's a living God who is moving throughout history. That becomes harder and harder for people to even remember. Our imaginations are framed in such a way that it's easier for us not to hold on to that and think about that or order our lives around that than to. It becomes a much more difficult thing. So when you live in this kind of secular age, transcendence as an overall meaning system, the idea that there's a living God who moves throughout history becomes more and more unbelievable to people. And yet, the positive here, or the positive charge, the plus of our battery, is that people feel a desperation, a deep desperation to construct meaning and purpose for themselves. So they are looking for meaning and purpose, but they're not so sure that there's any sense, even if they can hold on to it, that a living God can help them find it. And so they can say things like, I'm just going to take a break from God for a while. You can have people say that. As if a medieval person could hear us say that and they would think, how could you do that? I mean, they wouldn't think that was a possible thing, to take a break from God for a while. It'd be like us saying you're going to take a break from breathing for a while. You just couldn't do it. But this creates this drive towards purpose and meaning, also creates this very weird reality in this kind of secular age. It creates a secular age that is just littered with all sorts of spiritualities. Everybody wants to be spiritual because they need to find purpose and meaning. They also know they don't need to correlate to any classic form of belief. That's all been fragilized. So they can use quite thin, in many ways, other forms of spirituality until further notice. So you'll have people, pastors can tell you stories, being at a coffee shop, and someone comes up to them and is like, oh, you're a pastor. I see you with your collar on. Oh, that's great. Oh, that's really cool. That's really cool you're a pastor. I'm a spiritual person too. They'll say, but I don't need a church. I just go for a walk with my dog in the woods. That's my cathedral, is just being in those woods. That's all I need. Or they would say, yeah, I'm a spiritual person too. I really am. I have 3 meditation apps on my phone. I'm a very spiritual person as well. But the idea is you use those until further notice, until they don't work. You can go and select different ones as you go. So to live in this kind of secular age is to have all those beliefs fragilized. Now, I'm drawing a lot of this from a Canadian philosopher named Charles Taylor, who in 2007 wrote a very thick book, 70-page book called A Secular Age. It is the perfect book to keep your door open on a very windy day. It will do it. But in that book, it makes you a little nauseous because 770 pages, he only wants to answer one question. One question with 770 pages. And he doesn't even want to answer it for the globe. He wants to answer it for what he calls the leftovers of Latin Christendom. In other words, those of us in Western Europe, in North and South America, those who come from the western part of the church. He wants to know why in the Western world, if you go back just a short 500 years ago, if you go back to a big round number like 1500, to live in any of our Western societies in 1500, it was nearly impossible to live in those societies and not believe in God. And nearly impossible to function. And yet in a short 500 years, it's completely flipped. And now it's much easier to live in those societies and not believe in God than to believe in God. Now we may quibble with that as Americans, but that is definitely true in France. It's definitely true in the Scandinavian countries. It is definitely true even in a place like Germany or in the UK. Definitely true. So he wants to look at that. 770 pages to answer that. The crazy thing that will make you very nauseous is you basically have to read it 4 or 5 times before it really starts making sense. So it's a lot. But some of us keep reading it 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 and 8 times because he says really fascinating things. And one of the fascinating things he says is that this fragilization of secular 3, he says it's a two-way fragilization. It's a two-way fragilization. So it works like this. He thinks if you're someone who believes, who he counts himself a practicing Catholic, he says if you're someone who believes, you can't help it. In this kind of secular age, you're going to have moments where your belief becomes fragilized. You're going to have moments where you think to yourself, ooh, is this true? Or is this just the family I grew up in? I mean, if I would have grown up in another family, another part of the world, would I believe this? No, I believe it, I believe it, I believe it. You go on, and then you find another experience of fragilization. You think religion, is it true? Or is this all just an evolutionary trick? I mean, is all religion is false pattern recognition all the way down? No, I believe it, I believe it, I believe it. He says if you're someone who believes, you can't help it. You're going to have moments where you find that belief fragilized. That's one of the dynamics. But like I said, it's a two-way fragilization. So he says it works the other way as well. Let's say you're a young adult. You're living somewhere cool like Brooklyn or Austin, Texas or something, and you grew up in Pittsburgh, but you went to an elite school, and you know what religion is. Come on. You know exactly what religion is. All religion is a historical reality used by people in power to keep other people down. And when you die, you go to heaven. Grow up. Come on, grow up. Your life is like a TV set. It's on. And when you die, it gets unplugged. It goes blank. It's off. It's over. That's what happens. Essentially, what you believe is you don't believe. He says even you, in this kind of secular age, will find your unbelief fragilized and you'll have moments of believing. So for instance, your sister says, you have to come hear your nephew's Christmas concert. You don't want to. You don't want to go there. But Christmas Eve's coming, and there's going to be a problem at the Christmas Eve family gathering if you don't go. So you show up to the last performance. You sit in the back of that Christmas concert at that music hall. When the lights, before they go down, you wave at your sister, so you get the points for being there. But the lights go down, and bang, it starts. Bum, 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 bum. It's a Bach concert. And you feel it. That music washes over you, and you feel touched by something. You feel reached for. You feel like there's a sense that there's something bigger in the universe, and you have a moment where your unbelief is fragilized, and you have a moment of believing. Or another one we know empirically is people will say, there is no purpose in the world. You think you have a purpose? Do you have any idea how big the universe is? Do you have any sense of it? You don't, because you can't get your mind around how huge this universe is. And it's continuing to expand, by the way. In our galaxy, in our universe and our galaxy, I mean, we are just out of the way. We're nothing special. We're just a teeny dot in this humongous, huge thing. And then our planet, in this teeny dot of our own little galaxy, in your lifetime on that piece of dust that's a planet, I mean, and you think that your life, that you think that your 70, 80, 90 years has any purpose? No, there's no purpose in the world. That's what I believe, there's no purpose. Well, we know empirically that people believe that, and then they have their first child. And they pick up their daughter for the first time, and they feel reached for. And it's more than just her little hand reaching for their finger. They feel like they've known her forever. Like somehow they were put on earth just to care for her. Like their whole life now makes some kind of purpose, that there's meaning within it. Or maybe just one more. You know that your mother's sick, and her health is declining quickly, but you get a phone call, and your cousin tells you that your mother has died. You weren't expecting her to decline so quickly, but you book a flight, you fly home, you're there for the funeral, you're there for the burial. Your cousin is kind enough to let you stay at his house. After this sad day, you spend late up into the night talking about your mother. Your siblings are there, your cousins are there, and you're just remembering your mother after the funeral, after the burial. And you're telling stories, and you're crying, and you're laughing a little bit, and crying some more. And your brother says, do you remember when we were young and Mom would always clean the kitchen, and she would sweep, and she'd always put on that 80s song, Come On Eileen, remember? And then she would sing into the top of the broom, come on, Eileen, and she would sway her hips. I swear what I mean. And remember, she'd always do that when we were in middle school and when we'd have friends over. Do you remember when she would do that and how embarrassed we would be? And that just makes you laugh, and it makes you cry, and it makes you poignantly remember your mother and miss her so deeply. Well, you go to bed. And you're up too late. You oversleep your alarm, and you have an early morning flight, and you know you have to get back to the airport. You get all your clothes into your luggage. You grab your suitcase. You go out to that rental car that's sitting in your cousin's driveway. You start that car, and you've left the radio on. And there it is, that same 80s song. Come on, Eileen. Yeah, I swear what I mean. And you have a choice. You can think to yourself, oh my gosh. Jeffrey Bezos is listening to everything we say all of the time. And the point is, that's a legitimate way to respond. It's a very legitimate response in this kind of secular age. It's just as legitimate to wonder, is there something bigger out there? Is there something at the center of this huge universe that cares about me? That reaches for me. Maybe the psalmist is right. Maybe there is a loving force that ministers love at the center of the universe. This is the constitution of living in a kind of secular age. But whether you're someone who believes and finds that belief fragilized, or you're someone who doesn't believe and finds that unbelief fragilized, what we all share is that we see the world through what Charles Taylor calls an immanent frame. What he means is to be a human being is to always be interpreting your life. What does your life mean? What does it mean to live this life? What is a good life? And to interpret something, you always have to interpret it through some kind of framework that you've been given by the society and the culture you've lived in. And the one that we see our world in is we see it through a framework that tends to be more immanent than transcendent, more natural than supernatural. So this is what Charles Taylor says. You can see Charles Taylor there. He says, the immanent frame is a constructed social space that frames our lives entirely within a natural rather than a supernatural order. It is a circumscribed space of the modern social imaginary that precludes transcendence. All right, just take that in. And I don't know if you're someone in this room who really struggles with sleep, like you struggle with insomnia. If that's the case, what I recommend to you is take a picture of this. And as you lay in bed, just read it over and over again, and you'll fall into a deep, deep sleep. All right, you can kind of pick this up. What he's trying to say is that we could see it, and if we were a medieval person, the lens we would see the world in is through a supernatural frame. Something strange happens, we would presume first the spirits are at work. God is moving amongst us. For us, we're all conditioned to assume if something weird happens, we first think, well, there must be some natural, material answer to this. Who put this up? Shoddy craftsmanship that put this thing up that fell off the wall. It has to be some kind of answer like that. Now, I like philosophers' quotes a lot. They do, I think scientifically, they do have tryptophan in them, so if you need that, there you go. But I also need pop stars' lyrics. So let me show you some pop stars' lyrics. At first blush, that makes me seem very cool. Like, oh, this guy's going to show us pop star lyrics. Except when you see this, you're going to realize this song is like 12 years old. But I want you to not pay attention to that, because I just want to feel cool. So help me feel cool. But this is the most controversial thing I'll say all night, I think. I'm going to show you lyrics from the British pop star Lily Allen. Do you know Lily Allen? Some of you are nodding. Here's my most controversial thing I'll say. Lily Allen is basically who Katy Perry is trying to be. All right. So if you're a Katy Perry fan, you are very angry with me right now. But I want to point out, I did not insult Taylor Swift. So by American law, you are not allowed to hurt me. If I insulted Taylor, then it would be okay to hurt me, but I did not. All right, so here's Lily Allen. Again, don't pay attention that this is like 12 years old, but in a song called The Fear, and what you need to know about Lily Allen is it's very poppy, very, very poppy, but also very, very irreverent. Very kind of middle finger in your face with a pop lyric. And this gives you a sense of it. Here's her first lyric. Life's about film stars and less about mothers, but it doesn't matter because I'm packing plastic, and that's what makes my life so effing fantastic. All right, I have to tell you people, I have no idea what any of that means. No clue. I think it's dangerous to exegete a pop star's lyrics, so I'm not sure what packing plastic means. It probably means she has a credit card with a major credit limit on it. I think more than likely it means she's had one part of her body medically enhanced. Nevertheless, this becomes the measure of the good life. But you get it, irreverent in your kind of face. But this is the lyric I want you to see. She says, now I'm a weapon of massive consumption. It's not my fault, so I'm programmed to function. Now here it is. She says, now I'm not a saint, but I'm not a sinner. Now everything's cool as long as I'm getting thinner. I'm not a saint, I'm not a sinner. Now everything's cool as long as I'm getting thinner. Very tongue-in-cheek, mind you. I mean, she's saying it to be controversial, but also very enlightening and insightful. Essentially, she's saying, for most of the history of the last 500 years of the West, people really cared. I mean, really deeply cared. Were they a saint or were they a sinner? Were they bound for heaven or were they bound for hell? I mean, my goodness. Martin Luther, who kicks off the Protestant Reformation, is in the Erfurt Monastery as a monk, and he can literally not sleep, wondering, is he a saint or is he a sinner? He's overwhelmed by the burden. Is he bound for heaven or is he bound for hell? Is he a saint or is he a sinner? And Luther has this great theological breakthrough when he rereads Romans and he discovers it isn't an either or at all. It's a both and. And one of his more beautiful theological constructions is called his simul, where we are simultaneously both saints and sinners through the work of Jesus Christ. And that was a balm for Northern Europeans for 500 years, all the way up until this British pop star. All right, we're not going to give her that much credit. But she signals something. She essentially says, not once. Unlike Martin Luther, not once has she woken up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat, wondering is she bound for heaven or bound for hell? Is she in God's good graces or not? She has not lost 1 second of sleep worried about that. But what's fascinating is she's lost sleep. Oh, she has woken up in the middle of the night with deep terror. Deep terror. She has felt poignant anxiety and fear. It's just that its referent is not a holy God and God's laws and commands. The referent is something natural, material. Swimsuit season's coming. What are people going to think of my body? This is what he means by the imminent frame. Even our deepest fears, even our deepest anxieties no longer are transcendent, but become imminent. These are the realities of the imminent frame. Now, what we should do is I should play this song for you, right? Well, that would seem a bit too obvious. So I want to play a song, but I want to play a song from you from an independent band. Now, I don't know if you need another life hack. I've given you a sleep hack already, but another life hack is if you're ever in a room and you need to recover some of your cool cred, you just say, I've been listening to an independent band, and everyone has to think you're cool. So I'm going to play a song from you from an independent band. This independent band is called Purple Mountains. Does anyone in the room know Purple Mountains? No one? So I'm the coolest person in the room. That's great. All right. Some of you actually were nodding a little bit. So Purple Mountains, I'm going to play a song for you called Margaritas at the Mall. It's about 2 minutes. You'll see the lyrics come up. Just make note of what lyric jumps out to you. And I don't know if Brian's back there and can give us just a little bit more volume on this. So what lyric jumps out to you? All right, so just take 20 seconds, turn to someone next to you. What lyric jumped out to you? Just 20 seconds. Quickly share that with someone next to you. All right, so somebody yell out a line that jumped out to them. Shame to be alive. Yep. Yeah. How long can the world go on under such a subtle God? How long can the world go on under no new word from God? In many ways, this encapsulates what it means to live in this kind of secular age. Western secular age isn't the elimination of God from society. The accomplishment, if you will, of our kind of secular age isn't the elimination of God. So, for instance, like Soviet communism tried to eliminate God from a society. Ours isn't the elimination of God, but it is the making of God into quite a subtle force, quite a subtle reality. God has become a quite subtle thing. Most people still, when they're asked by social scientists, do you believe in God? High percentage say yes, but God has become quite subtle. And yet here's this young man, which I should have told you is no former youth group kid. He is a person who's never spent a day in the life of a church. Actually, a young Jewish man, and never even went to temple or went to a synagogue in his life, really. And here he is asking a very deep question. How long can the world go on under such a subtle God? How long can the world go on under no new word from God? Well, he says what you get something in place of it. You'll always get something in place of it. Well, what you get in place of it is a mall and margaritas. And they come in all assorted flavors. Now, I have to tell you, I'm quite amazed as we think about the state of the church, and we think about will the church and our denominations be around for another 75 years. It's amazing that over the last 30, 40 years, Protestantism has made a move for missional reasons to turn our churches into malls, to make them feel like malls that could attract people to come. I can't tell you how many places I'm at where people say, you know what we need at our church? We need to get a margarita machine. Okay. No one has ever said that to me. Because if they did, I would go to that church. That would be part of that church. But I can't tell you how many have said, you know what we need? We just need better coffee. I mean, if we had a better coffee. Essentially, if we had a better advertising hook, we could get more and more of them to come. Now, remember I said at the very beginning of this, if we're not careful and we don't really know what we mean by the secular age, even out of our best intentions, we may make matters worse. This is it. That what we end up doing to all sorts of people, if the real issue is a secular 3 issue, how do I believe in the midst of this doubt? How do I make meaning in my life? We turn our churches into malls of imminence and just have people choke on more and more imminence, close them down inside the imminent frame, and give them all assorted religious flavors of more and more margaritas. And yet people are really deeply asking, is there something deeper here? Is there something more at stake? So let me land this plane to conclude by telling you a story that maybe illustrates this and maybe gives us some handles of how we can think about this in our congregations and as a way forward. So a few years ago, I read a book that was an award-winning book by an anthropologist named Tanya Luhrmann. She writes in the name T.M. Luhrmann, and she wrote this very fascinating book called When God Talks Back. And she wanted to explore a society like ours that is so polarized. She said one of the conflicts in our society that we haven't looked at enough is that we have a group of people in our society, small group of people, but a group of people nevertheless, who say they hear God talk all the time, that God talks to them, God tells them stuff. And then we have a larger group of people who thinks anyone who says that, well, those people must be out of their mind. Like this must be low-grade schizophrenia or something, and these people share cubicle walls. So she decided she wanted to study the people who said that they heard God speak to them. So as a good anthropologist, she moved in with those people. She joined a vineyard church in the third wave Pentecostal movement. She was living in Chicago at the time, so she joined one in the Chicago area, spent 3 years living in a vineyard church. She got her job at Stanford University. She moved to Northern California, spent another 3 years in a vineyard church in Northern California, spent 6 years living with these folks. She writes this book and she says, can we say that people who hear God speak, that what this really is kind of low-grade schizophrenia, or there's some kind of mental condition at play? She says, after living 6 years with these people and going through my kind of scientific process, I can say unequivocally, absolutely not. There's no correlation to any kind of mental illness in people who hear God speak. She said, well, then can we say that people who hear God speak, they are hearing God speak? She said, well, I'm submitting this book for tenure at Stanford. You don't get tenure at Stanford for saying God speaks to these people, so I'm not going to say that. But then she said something even more beautiful. She said, what I can tell you is during my time living with these people, my father died. And it ripped my life apart. And these people prayed for me. These people walked with me. She said, it changed my life. I was moved by it. I thought it was just a beautiful, interesting book. But I did think, okay, if you're in a Pentecostal community, a Vineyard Church, and you say God speaks to you, people pat you on the back. You say that in a Lutheran or a Presbyterian church, people don't pat you on the back, they step back. Like, they find that to be weird. So I thought, well, what would happen if I went to 2 Presbyterian churches and a Lutheran church and asked people, have they ever had an experience where they heard God speak to them? So I did this thing called life history interviewing. For my sample, I only needed to do 12 people, so it's not a national conclusive study, but it was 12 people. And I asked them, doing this thing called this kind of method, what you do is you just write 6 big questions, you record it with their permission, you just have a conversation, let it go, and then you transcribe it, look for themes. So again, just 12 people. But all 12 of these people, I said to them, have you ever had an experience where God spoke to you? I had one man in his late 70s say, oh my gosh, whenever anyone says God speaks to him, I never trust those people. I think that's pure manipulation. I think when you say God speaks to you, you're just trying to manipulate me. It's really convenient for you, isn't it, when someone says God spoke to him? I would never trust anyone who said God speaks to them. Except one time. And all of these people had at least one-time experience. For instance, this older gentleman said, the one time God spoke to him, he was out in front of his yard, he was raking. His best friend who had lived across the street for 35 years lost his wife of almost 50 years. And he heard God say to him, go to Gus, sit with Gus, and say this to Gus. Almost all the times they heard God speak, it was a call into ministry. I don't mean go to seminary, get a seminary degree. I mean go and care for another human being. Be with them. They were beautiful stories. Incredibly beautiful. I felt privileged to hear them. After hearing them, I said, my gosh, this is amazing. I said, have you ever told anyone in your church this story? All these people said, nope, never told anyone in my church's story. I said, okay. But clearly you told your pastor because your pastor nominated you to talk to me, set up this conversation. So clearly you've told your pastor. Nope, never told my pastor this story. How long can the world go on under such a subtle God? How long can the world go on under no new word from God? God speaks. God moves. God is acting in the world. And yet even in our churches, we're not creating space for these stories to be told, wrestled with, interpreted. But the one I want to end with tonight is the last interview I did with the woman who was the youngest in my sample. She was in her mid-30s. Her name was Rachel. And she came into her pastor's office and she looked like she wanted to be anywhere. It was a Sunday morning and we were supposed to talk for an hour, and you could tell by her whole vibe she thought she could get this done in 20 minutes. She wasn't doing this, but she basically was. Every question, 2 sentences, move on. She was trying to get this done. She kept telling me over and over again, I'm a single mom, I'm really busy, I'm a single mom. It wasn't working. So I was out of questions, still had 40 minutes left in this. I thought, I'm just going to throw one more Hail Mary pass, one more question, see if I can get her talking, or else this just isn't going to work. So I just made up a question off the top of my head, and I said, Rachel, have you ever had an experience where you felt so deeply ministered to that you felt like you knew it was the very presence of Jesus Christ? Her whole disposition changed, and she said, I have. And she said, I've been telling you throughout this interview that I'm a single mom, but I never told you why I'm a single mom. She said, I'm a single mom because my husband went on a business trip. Got on a plane, he flew to Chicago. She said he was supposed to be gone for 3 days. He was gone for about 13 hours. She said, I got a phone call. And on the other line was a young man, and he said, hi, ma'am, I'm calling because I'm from the hotel that your husband stayed at last night. So, ma'am, I'm calling because there's been a situation. She said he was just so nervous. So I'm calling because there's been a situation, and well, ma'am, so there's been, she said he couldn't get his words out. I said, well, so I'm calling because, let me start over. So ma'am, the reason I'm calling is there seems to have been, there was she said it just went on. He couldn't get his words out. So she had no idea what was going on. And finally he collected himself and he said, ma'am, I'm calling, well, ma'am, your husband is dead. Said housekeeping went into his room this morning, found him what they thought was unconscious in his bed. They immediately called the paramedics. They arrived, and they pronounced him dead on the scene. Said he more than likely had a heart attack in the middle of the night. The young man said, I was asked to call you. My manager is now dealing with the paramedics, and I was asked to call you and give you the hospital morgue that they're sending your husband's body to. She said when he finally said the words, they made no sense to her. Like she couldn't make them make sense. And she just kept going, what? And she said once they made sense, when they clicked into place, she said her first visceral experience was all the color being sucked out of the room. She looked in the living room and she saw her preschooler and her toddler. And she thought to herself, my life is over. You don't come back from this. She took out a business card. She wrote the hospital address, morgue of where they had sent her husband's body. She hung up the phone. She called her mother to come stay with her kids. She booked a flight. She said she flew to Chicago. She said that flight lasted 5 minutes. It lasted 5 days. She said she was so drowning in grief, she didn't even feel like her body was in time. She landed O'Hare. She went down to the cab stand. She gave the cabbie the card, and he drove. She said, I should have noticed this. She said, but I was drowning in grief and I didn't notice anything. She said, I should have noticed he parked the car. But she walked in and they had her itinerary. They knew when she was going to be coming. They immediately took her to a side room. She said she stood there. It felt like a day. It was probably a minute. And all of a sudden, the doors in that back of that room opened up. A man from the hospital pulled in a gurney, and here it was. This was going to be the horrific moment where this nightmare would become too real to survive. She said the man from the hospital morgue came, grabbed the sheet to pull it back so she could identify the body. And she said just as he started to do that, she felt a hand on her shoulder, and an arm came around the front of her with a water bottle. And she started to cry, and she said to me, it was the cabbie. It was the cabbie. She said, I never felt more ministered to. She said, I did not know how I was going to put my life back together, but I knew that God had not abandoned me, that Jesus Christ would see me through. And then she said the same words that all the rest of them said. I've never told anyone that story. And that cabbie. Now, I know nothing about that cabbie. I felt the privilege of hearing that story, felt like an utter holy moment, just thanked her for that. And that ended our conversation. So this is purely fictional. But that cabbie needs your church. He needs your congregation. That cabbie needs to stumble into your Tuesday night Bible study and go, I got to tell you what happened to me. I don't know how to make sense of it. I mean, you all know that I often work nights, at least 3 days a week. I work 9 to 9. Well, I was on my last run. It was my last run of the day, and I was going to be done. And this woman came down, and she gave me a card. And as soon as I looked at the address, I knew that place. Because when my cousin Ronnie had his accident at work, that's where they took his body. And I remember my auntie throwing herself on the floor. So I drove. And I knew this woman was up for something. She was about to confront something. But I got there. And I was supposed to just drop her off and be done. But I got there and I heard it. I heard it as clear as day. I don't know how to make sense of it. I don't know if I believe it myself, but I heard it. I don't know. It must have been God. I heard God say, don't leave her alone. Whatever you do, do not leave her alone. But I didn't know what to do. So I just went in, put my hand on her shoulder, and gave her a water bottle. He needs your Tuesday night Bible study of misfits, of holy misfits, to say, behold, you have been a servant of God. God has moved in our midst. Jesus Christ has led us here. You have participated in the very ways of God, which is to take what is dead and bring life out of it. You have been a servant of God. I think what it means to live in a secular age, all the challenges we face. As you heard in your last lecture, so true. The numbers do not look good, but God moves. This God of Israel, this God made known in Jesus Christ, moves to take what is dead and make it alive. But we have to relay these stories. We have to create space for these stories to be shared. We have to interpret these stories. What does this mean for us? What does this call us to? And I think our way forward inside of this kind of secular age is to create spaces for us to articulate these stories. We can never free ourselves into some hermetically sealed space where doubt isn't there, where these aren't stories where they can be contested, but they also become stories that can feed us and give us life. And I think this is the way we move forward. Let me pray for us. God, thank you for this room of people who deeply care for the church, who deeply care for the gospel and its good news to the world. God, may you lead us with your Spirit. And may you bless our further conversations around our tables and as we continue to debrief and talk about this tonight. Amen.
We are ready to move on with the after party. This is the after party segment of the evening. We're going to invite Reverend Dr. Dan Ailshire to come and lead the discussion based on your questions for Andrew Root. Dan was for a very long time the head of the Association of Theological Schools, which accredited the seminary you went to if you're a clergy, and which is based here in Pittsburgh. And he has been a leading voice, and he has written broadly about the state of the church, and especially with the rise of Christian nationalism in our country today. And so please do welcome Dan Ailshire.
I was just looking through these. There. I guess if I were a secular one, I would still be asking, does that mean something?
Yeah, you would. The demons are in the room, is what we would think, yeah.
I do think that as I glanced through, there was one that kind of looked like a true secular 3 response to the questions. If you start at 2, 3, 4, it goes not sure, not yet, not sure.
That's it.
I want to ask you some questions as I reflect on these. Andy, have you ever heard the voice of God?
Yeah, the most formative thing in my life, actually, is I won't go too deep into the story, but is the real experience I had as a 6-year-old. And the first friend I ever had, this is a bit of a sad story, the first friend I ever had got diagnosed with cancer. And so one of my childhood is filled with this experience of losing this friend, Benjamin. And my parents were kind of classic baby boomer, middle class, new middle class people. Is like, I remember my mother telling me Benjamin died, and then that was it. You know, I mean, essentially that was it. There's no sense that I needed to talk to anyone. Well, I started like having these terrible dreams. And then we moved houses, and the same direction of Benjamin's house, they were building a house. So like in the new neighborhood, there was one house, and then Benjamin lived in my old neighborhood. In this new one, it was one house, and then they were digging out a foundation for this house. And I became this really strange kid, just done with kindergarten, who would walk the perimeter of that foundation of the house. It was like I was a character in a Wes Anderson movie. You know, have you seen like Wes Anderson movies? Like I would walk this, and I would spit into that pit, like into that hole. I was a 6-year-old boy, but I had been having these terrible dreams. No one had talked to me about this, and my mother had told me, "Don't go near that hole. Don't go." But I would only go at dusk. I mean, it was really like a Wes Anderson movie. Like, you know, this strange suburban kid walks near the hole. But one day I went to spit in it, and I fell in that hole. And this is a story that would never convince any atheist of anything, because I was not in danger. They would have come and found me 10 minutes later if they couldn't. I could have yelled, and the people next door would have found me, but I felt utter terror. Like utter terror. And now looking back on it, it was this kind of existential sense of living in a world where 5-year-olds can get cancer and die, like was represented in that hole. And I remember trying to run myself out of that hole, and I could not get out. Like I just kept sliding down. And I didn't know what to do. And the only thing I knew what to do is what the old Lutheran ladies at my church did, is I prayed. And I heard God speak to me. I heard Jesus say to me, run. And I ran myself out of that hole. And I ran into my screen door in this Minnesota summer night, humid night, and I was like one of the women who was running back from the tomb. I ran and I said, I fell in the hole, and I prayed, and Jesus got me out of the hole. I had to testify to this experience. And again, this is the kind of dynamics of living in a secular 3 age. That's not convincing to a lot of people. It's actually clearly psychological transference. It's clearly a kid dealing with the trauma of a loss of a friend. There's all sorts of other answers to it. But I had this experience of Jesus speaking to me, and more than speaking to me, this reality that Jesus is the one who comes into dark places and binds his being with your being. That Jesus Christ is a binding force that comes into terror and death and is present in it. And that reality has never left me. Like if there's one line that just goes through, like Luther's theology of the cross just made so much sense to me because of my 6-year-old experience. And I've just tried to continue to live in that. And again, I think it's a good story for Secular 3 because, there's no way that someone who was already like kind of living with a closed sense of the world could find that convincing. There's all sorts of other answers. And yet you can't convince me that there wasn't something deeply significant and real about that. Like I can take other people's interpretation and be like, yeah, maybe, clearly I was really struggling with this. But the richness of that word and what it did in me and the way it sent me to testify to this experience brought life out of death. And so I'm still trying to make some sense or live out of that experience as a 6-year-old.
James Loder, who taught at the school where you did your PhD, wrote a book one time about the transforming moment. Yeah. That there are moments in many of our lives that become the galvanizing kind of points, and they can come very young. Yeah. We're at this event because a congregation is celebrating its 75th anniversary, and Brian said, we wanted to think about the future. What will the next 75 years be? Well, that may be too long for you to give an estimate, but you're educating some 30-year-old students now. And if they stay in ministry for 35 years, they're half of that time. Yeah. So what will you tell them about the work they have ahead of them?
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be easy. And I guess I want us to live in kind of two directions, maybe a bit in our imagination looks like we're getting a different mic for you, maybe. Okay. Live in two directions. And what I mean by that is I think potentially in the next 30 years, next 40 years, a lot of the structures that we live in now may not be there. They just may not. But one of the things that I think we have to deeply resist is there is a certain level of fatalism with that. I will hear folks say to me all the time, like, well, if we don't get our act together, there's going to be no church in America. Like the church is just going to disappear. And I think that's a really deeply metaphysically fatalistic statement. Like you are saying that the very body of Jesus Christ will not continue to exist if we don't do better. And I don't believe that. I think that there will always be a community of people proclaiming the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. There will always be that. So at that level, I think there's freedom to say it is not you do not have to do a Herculean job to keep the church going. The church is the very body of Jesus Christ, and it is God's responsibility. So God will keep it going. Now that said, that does not mean the Peace USA gets to exist for another 50 years. Doesn't mean Luther Seminary gets to exist. And that is real grief and real suffering when those structures go away. Doesn't mean your congregation gets to exist, but human bodies in community testifying to a living God made known in the person of Jesus Christ will continue. And so at one level, I think there's a lot at stake and a lot that will change. And at another level, there's the utter freedom of the fact that actually, broadly theologically, the church disappears anyhow. The church is not here in the fulfillment of the new creation. The church serves in this world to testify to this God who is going to make all things new. But in the eschaton, there is no church. And so this is a for a time ministry anyhow. And this for a time will come with pain, and it will come with suffering, it will come with loss, it will come with celebration. But I guess I ultimately want us to put our hope in a living God more than in any way that we could get creative and save this. But at the same time, I don't want to be kind of punk rock and be like, well, your buildings are what are killing you, and you just need to get rid of all your buildings and, just get creative. Because I think human beings need buildings. I think human beings need to remember their histories. I think even these institutional structures we have are created to make life good. And if they go, it will be really hard. It will be a form of suffering. But the suffering is in a bigger story, is what I don't want us to miss.
There's some questions, kind of the how-to questions. Excuse me, can you hear me now? I think that evidently the forces really are trying to say something. We are now two mics and a few other things, and I think that I should get the point by now. Several of the questions were, how do we do our church in ways that allows people to tell their stories, to claim their stories? How do we do church in ways that we develop patterns of community that are deeper than the ones we have? How do we help the stranger feel welcome in our place? What would you say in response to those kind of comment questions?
Yeah, I think very practically, like, how do we become places that share our stories? I think it's always unfair. Like, if I were to ask you right now to turn around your table and tell a story about water skiing. Tell someone around you a moving story about water skiing. Most of your brains would all just go blank. Like, some of you would be like, water skiing? Have I ever been water skiing? Do I even know what water skiing is? What is that? It's unfair to ever say to anyone, just tell me a story. You actually have to hear a lot of stories before you can tell stories. And so I think a big piece of our congregational leadership is both how we create the space for stories to be told, but then filling the space with stories. And sometimes that is actually our pastors telling stories. And I always tell pastors, the kind of stories you receive are the kind of stories that people hear. And the kind of stories you get back are the kind that they've heard. So if they are very triumphalistic stories about how great you are, then people are going to feel like they only have those kind of stories to tell. And so I do think that this is a formative kind of process of how this happens. So, like, really practically, one of the things we do in our little church, and I'm not good at this, but my wife Cara is a genius at this, but we do like micro storytelling. So, for instance, people will come into church, grab a bulletin, and there'll also be a slip of paper, and it will say something like, I was my most lost win, ... And people are asked as they prepare for worship, in the midst of singing some hymns, to just fill that out. And then in the time of the prayers of the people, or maybe at the end of the sermon, she'll read those. And so you'll hear, I was never so lost. I was the most lost when our son moved out and we didn't talk to him for 4 years. I was the most lost when when my company went under. I mean, you get these incredible stories, and it's not that anyone had to stand up and tell those, but it just seeds the congregation with the sense that there are deep stories at play here. And then I think the other level is leadership-wise, being able to see people and say, I think you have a story to tell here. I think this community needs to hear that. And what would that mean to help empower you and help you tell that story? I think it's practically pastoral malpractice to just kind of kick people up and say, here's the mic, tell us a story. I think that's overwhelming and is not helpful. But having people watch it and then have small ways that they taste it, and then have certain people that you feel led by the Spirit to call them to do it and help them feel empowered to do it, can make that occur. But there is a sense here where I am talking, and this is a recovery of an old Christian word of trying to think about our congregations as places to give testimony. Yeah. But one of the things I want to be real careful about is a lot of us are allergic to the word testimony because we've always thought of it as 3 acts, that things were fine, then I got diagnosed with cancer, I couldn't pay my medical bills, but lucky for me, I was teaching chemistry, and there was a kid in my chemistry class who taught me how to cook crystal meth. So I started selling drugs, and I became the baddest gangster in all of Albuquerque, New Mexico. You hear, I'm just giving you the plot of Breaking Bad, right? But the testimony usually is, I broke bad, then I found Jesus, and everything's been great ever since. Like, saved me from that. And everyone who doesn't have that experience is like, well, I was never selling drugs, so I guess I don't have a story to tell. But a testimony also can be right in the midst of it. Like, especially in Secular 3, the kind of stories we need to hear are sometimes people saying, like, I doubt more than I believe right now. Or, I often, this is a fictional story, but I think it's in your community that someone could say, you could say, would you tell our 9th graders a story over Lent? Tell us a story of the cross, of that. And someone could say, I've been going to this church forever, but my daughter's been sick. And I'm sure you 9th graders don't know my daughter. She's 6 years old, but we've been from one specialist to the next specialist trying to figure out what's going on with her. No one knew. Lucky for us, we figured it out. Specialists discovered what was wrong with her. There's nothing they can do until she's older. But she has to have, for now, she has to have a steroid injection 4 times a day. But they have to be spaced out perfectly. So now every night at 4:30, my alarm goes off. And I have to get up, go into my daughter's room, shake her awake, this person in your congregation, you'd say, shake her awake. Room's covered in a pink hue from her nightlight. I have to find her amidst all of her stuffed animals. I have to shake her awake till I can find a vein, and I prick her. And every night she looks at me with a look of betrayal. And then I have to rub her back until I can get her to fall asleep again. But I have to tell you, 9th graders, I haven't fallen asleep again. I've gone back to bed. And most nights I lay and look at that ceiling. And I know you're all reading Romans right now, where Paul says God works all things out for the good of those who love God. But I have to tell you, I lay in bed and I look at that ceiling and I think, okay, God, she's 6 years old. What's good about this? I can't pray anymore. I just can't. And that story is in your congregation. And that's the story a group of 9th graders needs to hear. That's the story a congregation needs to hold, which is what John of the Cross called the dark night of the soul. And the testimony is also the confession of the dark night of the soul. And so we do have to have a kind of eye on what kind of stories we mean. And I do think there are these stories, you can hear from back in my own experience, that there are these stories that move from cross to resurrection, from death to new life. And when we hear those kind of stories, we want to become aware that God is going to move in some way. So I have a wager that this is how this God moves. This God moves. When there's impossibility, this God brings new possibility. When there's death, this God brings life. And we have to keep telling our stories in that kind of pattern. There's other ways to tell stories, like people are saying, I'm the greatest. I'm the greatest there ever was. It's a kind of story too, but it's not a story of death to life, brokenness to new life, which I think is at the heart of the Christian story.
There were a lot of stories in the press this past Easter season with, and it was true here in Pittsburgh, with more adults seeking admission to the church, mainly young adults here in the Diocese of Pittsburgh, the Roman Catholic Diocese. There were stories like that. So here we are at this moment of increasing secularization, and the secularization is changing how it expresses itself. And then these anecdotes of more people coming, or stories of orthodoxy, which may be as close as you can get to 500 years ago. I mean that seriously, in terms of worship and in terms of understanding this icon, this physical thing has holy presence. And how do you make sense of the kind of Christian spirituality that's making the news these days, with this moment of level 3 secularization and the religious institutions compressing?
It's I think a really important question. I mean, Catholics are reporting particularly young men flooding back to the church. There's been a whole movement from conservative Protestants to just no relationship to the church, kind of finding orthodoxy. There's also been kind of movements on YouTube of even reform discourse and kind of talking about kind of coming back to doctrine and things like that. So the question is, like, where does this fit in this? And I teach for a week in Norway at the end of every summer, and the Church of Norway, which is experienced incredible amounts of decline and is like a case study for secularization, they've done more kind of adult or like teenage baptisms in the last year than they had done for decades. And they're just seeing particularly young men show up to the state church. And they're like, what is going on? And what do we think about this?
You could have said, what the hell is going on? But
what the hell is going on here? I risk being too complicated here, but I think one of the dynamics of one of the reasons it's so weird, our cultural moment, or just being modern is weird, is because there's always not two sides. Like, we keep on being told that we are living in pluralized times. Everything is pluralized, meaning like there's two sides. But one of the things Charles Taylor says at the end of this big thick book is, he says, one of the things that's so confusing and creates all these dilemmas and conflicts inside modernity is it's never two sides, it's always three sides. So even in a modern world, you will still find a group of people, I think represented in this room, who still believe that there is something beyond, still hold to some kind of sense that there's something beyond death and something beyond just human flourishing. Like, for instance, we think there's a kingdom of God, or there's a larger reality. And he says those people always find themselves in conflict, not with one side, but two sides. So there's always a group of people he calls exclusive humanists. And exclusive humanists tend not to trust religious people because they think you're not really participating in creating a society of human flourishing, because you repress people and tell them that they're sinful, and you are committed more to the kingdom of God than to this world, so I'm not so sure I could trust you. But then there's another group of people, and this has been their heyday in the last almost decade, that is what we could call the counter-enlightenment people. And those people hate exclusive humanists. So the exclusive humanists say we need to create a society where we talk a certain way, where we agree on certain oversights of institutions so everyone can freely be themselves. And there's another group of people who have always hated that. This is what Isaiah Berlin, if you remember from your undergraduate days, talked about the difference between positive liberty and negative liberty. So there's a group of people who believe in positive liberty, meaning we all have to do some stuff so we can create a society where everyone can participate. So there's certain things we can say and cannot say, certain agreements we should make for how we treat people, how our institutions are set up. And then there's another group of people who think that that is not freedom. That freedom is I should be able to go west and do whatever I want. Like the homeowners association telling me what color my house is not freedom. And those are kind of counter-enlightenment people. If that makes sense. And so what I wonder is happening now, and so let me give you a figure of one of these things. Someone like Jordan Peterson is the return of a certain counter-enlightenment perspective, where he basically says, the Canadian government telling me what pronouns I have to put on my syllabus is not freedom. It cannot tell me what to do that. And then gets a huge following from young men for what? What does he say? Stop whining and make your bed. In other words, take your life into your own hands. Be a bit more heroic. Just don't whine about this. What I worry about, and there's been a lot of populist movements that have grabbed this kind of counter-enlightenment perspective across the West. What I worry a bit about is that what a lot of this return is a kind of return to religion as a counter-enlightenment expression over and against exclusive humanists and universities and things like that. Now, I think it could be incredibly cynical for us to then dismiss it. To say, oh, all these young men who are coming back to church, actually it's a really dangerous kind of thing. It could be, but I think it could also be cynical. We could look at what the Holy Spirit's doing and be like, well, we know better, or we're worried about that. However, I think it puts the onus on us that's actually something quite beautiful that we should never lose track of. What it means, whether it's moved by a certain kind of populist inclination to try to find a kind of heroic stance, and religion becomes a place where men get to actually voice their opinions, and in the other side they're saying that we don't need to hear from toxic men anymore, and so this side is all the manosphere of kind of gaining your masculinity back. If it's true that that's why some people are going back to religion, what's demanded in response is to preach the gospel. And so what ultimately is, whether they're coming because they're motivated by a certain kind of counter-enlightenment kind of drive that is something like populism, or it's a genuine sense of an openness to transcendence and a deeper tradition, it demands the same response, which we never stop preaching the gospel of Christ and Him crucified. And that, I think, checks the overabundance of this is just a way for me to actually live out my masculinity. And it also keeps us from cynically saying, well, we know better than the Holy Spirit. So I would want my students just to proclaim the gospel. Start sounding a little bit like Karl Barth here. Just exegete. Preach the gospel, preach the gospel, preach the gospel. But I think it does reveal something that our institutions have been very strongly run in a more exclusive humanist frame, and some people try to mobilize religion over and against that side in a culture war. But the only way to check it is to be able to preach the gospel, because this is complicated in more than two sides. That was a lot for you to take in. But I think it's complicated, but we should see it as a potentially hopeful moment. But it puts the same weight on our shoulders, which is that we must preach the gospel.
I think that's a great response. I want to clarify one thing in my comment about orthodoxy. I have many Orthodox folks who are close to me, and I wasn't meaning anything derogatory about orthodoxy. I was meaning a way of being Christian that seems to have, that goes back more like things were 500 years ago, and understanding that is a good way of being Christian.
Yeah, and just to add to your point, one of the things that's really interesting about orthodoxy is in the story that I was telling you here, we're talking about the West, and particularly the leftovers of Latin Christendom. So it's very fascinating to look at the Orthodox Church, because in the very early schism between East and West, it went a different direction. So it's had a very different relationship to modernity than the West has had. And I think there's really cross-fertilization that we can learn from each other, where the East has not had as much of a reforming impulse as the West has had, but it's had a much more deeply spiritual impulse of a deep sense of the world being flooded with a kind of transcendent spirit everywhere than the West has been able to kind of hold. So you have these challenges where the East has had a harder time, say, speaking out against someone like Putin, because just the reforming disposition isn't there, where if you're a Western Christian, you're just kind of always uncomfortable with everything. You know, you're a bit ready to protest or to try to reform everything, but that also leads to the potential of losing some of the deep, constant echoes of the transcendent reality. And so I think there's a lot to learn across those sides.
One person commented in a question about what do you think about that applies to your own congregation. One person wrote, maybe our Baptist friends are right. I taught at a Baptist seminary for 12 years, and I would just encourage you to be very careful about which Baptist you speak to figure out what is the right. What do you want people most to take away from this time together?
Yeah. What I ultimately want us to take away from this, I think, is that God moves, and God is moving. And that puts a challenge on us. And the challenge is, how do we discern that? How do we know that? How do we interpret that? So, I mean, to use a bit of theological language, what I am really most interested in is what we might call the concreteness of revelation, or how God concretely and really reveals God's self, and how we then live into that. And I don't think there's any really easy way to answer that question. But I think what I would want for our congregations is to really wrestle with, from pastors as well as lay people, wrestle with the question of, where is it? How is it that our people encounter a living God? Where is that happen? Where is that happening in our community? What does that look like in our community? And then therefore, how can we focus on that? Where is it that God reveals God's stuff, where God is active here? And then let's double down on that. What I also really want to take away from this is that what we really do need, I think, are communities of people who live and die together. And what I'm ultimately really worried about is that if we see this as a secular two issue, what we end up doing is undercutting and hollowing out the importance of the pastor. And what I mean by that is like the importance of someone who will help you live before God and die before God. And instead what you get is someone who's going to try to help you save your institution. And that's fine. And there's part of the responsibility of how do you steward this institution. But there is nowhere in our society that will help you live well and die well. And I hate to break this to you all tonight. I hate to break this, but you're all going to die. I mean, the crazy thing is people don't like that. You know, people don't like to be reminded of that. And so if one dynamic of living in this kind of secular age is you can go a long way without thinking about God, one of the maybe correlated with that is you can go a long way in this society without thinking about the fact that you're going to die. And we actually create whole structures to deny that. And you remind a group of people like this that they're going to die, they don't like it. They can get mad at you. So you probably know at Western Seminary, Todd Billings, who is a kind of philosophical, historical theologian, and he's been living with terminal cancer for a very long time. And basically he'd say his medication is keeping him alive. but he's written these beautiful books, memoir on kind of thinking about dying, but he's a great theologian. So he's written these pieces on kind of thinking about a Christian death and thinking about what is death in the midst of the Christian tradition. So he wrote this one on a Christian death and talking about how before the modern period, the pastor's job was to help people prepare for a Christian death. And that basically your baptism was the preparation to start the road to have a Christian death. So I was moved by the book. And I do weird things at my dinner table. So before my kids had moved out, I think Maisie was my daughter was maybe a junior in high school. And so I sat down at dinner and I had finished the book and I said, "So Maisie, how are you preparing to have a Christian death?" Well, something only I can do. And she went, "Oh, Dad," and like covered her ears and pushed herself back from the table. She was just disgusted with the question. It was almost as if I said, "Just so you know, later tonight, when you're asleep, Mom and I are going to have a little fun." It was basically like, she was just repulsed. She was absolutely repulsed by this. And I think in many ways she encapsulates our society. We're just repulsed by the thought of the fact that you are a finite creature that has to prepare to have some kind of death. You're going to have one, some kind of death. And I just don't think a human life, I think we're trying something in the modern epoch where we're thinking you can have a good death, which therefore reflects something about your life, without having a pastor, without having a spiritual leader, without having who takes you into this larger story. So whatever we think will keep our churches going in the next 75 years, I don't want it to come at the expense if someone who can be present with you when you find out you're 42 years old with your first child and you finally found your soulmate late in life and you have this kid and then you have pain in your breast and you go to the doctor and you see 6 different doctors and they tell you it's fine, it's fine, it's fine. Finally you find one that does scans and says that you have breast cancer and that you're going to be dead in 2 years. And you do die. And I watched, this is how our pandemic went, is that Jen, that very story in our church, she got diagnosed with breast cancer. She called Cara up and she said, "I just don't want to die. I just don't want to die." So our pandemic was framed by Cara doing morning and evening prayer with Brian and Jen every night on Zoom. So we'd get up, she'd get on Zoom with them, pray with them. At night, meet them and pray with them. And that was in 2020. And in 2023, Jen died of cancer. And to watch that 3 years of her pastoring her and preparing her to die and preparing the community to hold her as she died, literally and figuratively, and then pick up and walk with Brian as he now has to raise this young daughter by himself. The need of a pastor to do that. I don't want that to get swallowed up by saying, you better innovate your way out of this. You better find creativity beyond this. I don't think they're mutually exclusive. But I just don't want one to swallow the other. There is nothing more beautiful than a pastor who walks with their people as they live and they die. And there is something about this experience we need others to be with and for us. We need others to walk us through this. And I don't want us to lose that in the midst of it. We will not disappear. A community confessing Jesus Christ will exist. But where Jesus Christ is present is as we bear those realities and walk with each other in that. So that's the main thing I want us to take away from this. We are fragile. We are deeply fragile. And there will be pain as we go forward. But God is faithful. And God calls us to minister to one another and has blessed you in this room with pastors who care about you, who will walk with you. And that is an incredible gift.
I looked at your schedule and you're going to do 40 or 50 of these kind of events this year. I ask you this at the table, I'll ask you out loud, so private space becomes public.
Yeah.
What are you learning about pastors?
I'm learning that pastors ultimately feel, I think, like there's a piano hanging over their head. That at any second is going to fall and crash them. And one of the things I think they feel is that the reason there's that piano over their head that could fall at any second, they know this isn't true, but they feel it. It's their fault. And if it falls, it will be their fault. And one of the other things I want you to take away from this is that these are big realities. Like the movements of a secular age. I took you back to 1400.
Yeah.
You know, these didn't happen in 1982 or 2007. And one of the things Charles Taylor really, really resists, and I completely go with him on this, is that the way our society is and the issue we face is never what he calls a subtraction story. A subtraction story. What he means is that you'll sometimes hear this in the media, or we'll say this to each other, like, well, the Peace USA was fine until we did, it was one thing. You took one thing out, and then all this happened. Or we'll hear this politically, we'll say, well, this was a great society until we took prayer out of school, then it just went. And he thinks it never works that way. It's never one thing. It's never subtract one thing and the whole thing falls apart. But I think we still live with the illusion of subtraction stories, and I think because of that, pastors and lay people who are leading congregations feel like this piano's over their head, it's their fault, and if they do the one thing wrong, it's going to fall on their head, and then they'll only have themselves to blame. And I want us to see that these are big changes. These are really big changes that are not your fault. But they also call us to respond faithfully. And what will it mean to respond faithfully? Not necessarily successfully or in an optimized form, but what does it mean to act faithfully? And so I'm seeing just a lot of burnout, a lot of anxiety, a lot of anger that really is masking sadness, that somehow I failed, and it's my fault. And it's not. These are really big changes that have occurred, and it didn't happen on your watch. And some of the best things that other generations had allowed things to shift this way, allowed the river to shift this way. That made it harder for us. And all we can do is be faithful with where we're at and who we are, and again, live and die before God faithfully.
I've tried to read through some of your reflections and pose them in the form of questions, but I couldn't have gotten through everything just glancing at these right before we came up. Are there questions? We have a very thoughtful person among us. It would be bad stewardship not to inquire of that person, and I just want to open it up to all of you. What questions are on your mind? We don't have a traveling mic, so you'll just have to speak loudly. Yeah.
You used some verbs.
Yeah.
The secular.
Yeah.
So the secular 3 was participate.
Yeah.
I wonder if
Yeah.
you have verbs for secular 3.
I do. I think if I can find my remote or, yep, I can. So thank you. There's always someone who will point out, usually I get emails, they're like, we didn't finish the diagram. And I'm not accusing you of being a type A person, but other type A people are like, I haven't slept for 3 nights because we never finished the diagram. So the way I would finish, the options here within Secular 3, this would take us maybe farther than we want to go, but there's a sense that in it you can either have an open take or a closed spin. So what Charles Taylor means is that you can live with a sense of openness. And openness, so basically I did that for you when I said, you hear that same song on the radio, and you think, oh my gosh, Jeffrey Bezos is listening to everything we say. That's a legitimate response, but it is a closed spin. Anything uncanny, anything weird, anything potentially spiritual, you just think, well, it's the algorithm. Or you can live with an openness. Is there something open there? So I ultimately wonder what the congregation becomes, what the pastor becomes, is how do we help people believe again through deep encounters? Encounter with the living God, encounter with one another being really significant. Belief is deeply possible in secular 3, but it is a kind of believing again or believing through these deep moments of encounter is kind of what I'm pushing for. So it's a big question for us going forward with 75 years is are we really about dwelling or searching? And you can really hear Taylor's Catholicness here. He is very, very skeptical or very worried about particularly a Catholic church that just wants to make more Catholics. And what he means by that is just want to make more dwellers. He deeply wants a generation of Catholics using the Catholic tradition to seek for a living God, to seek for meaning in life, to seek for how the church can be faithful in the world. But the idea is to lead you out as opposed to just trying to make more affiliates. And I think it's a similar kind of question for us Protestants. Is the objective here that in 75 years we'll be back and we'll be able to say we have produced more dwellers. There's more people who dwell in our institutions and affiliate with us and pay their dues? Or will we say this tradition, the traditions that we live out of, the communities that we gather, the ways we worship together has helped us to seek deeply for a living God, for the meaning of our lives. It's sent us deep into the world.
I guess I'm curious what if you've seen what that means for the shape of like local congregations.
Yeah.
Because what you just said could just be a different way of saying participate.
Mm-hmm.
Like how do we become more nimble and flexible, more porous? What do we do with our buildings?
Yeah.
So it's not a come to us.
Yeah.
Kind of mindset. I'm curious if you have thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, so my answer to this is potentially one that would be deeply unsatisfying. And I think the way that we have to respond in anticipation or in preparation to encounter a living God is something that we have been formed to absolutely hate, which is to wait. And one of the things that we forget is that the first command that forms the church in the book of Acts, like we all love Acts 2. Like Acts 2, the Holy Spirit comes, and then we get the line that every American Protestant pastor loves, is that then we're told, and thousands were added to their number. Like, that's exactly what we're looking for in this sermon series, thousands added to their number. But we forget that we usually give the birth of the church in Acts 2, but it's really Acts 1. And so I don't know if you hang out with biblical scholars, but one of the most confusing things hanging out with biblical scholars is they'll say what their interest is. They don't just say, I read the New Testament. They'll say, well, my expertise is the Pauline epistles. Or they'll say, I do Matthew. Or sometimes they'll weirdly say, and they say it very fast, they say, my expertise is Luke Acts. I'm really into Luke Acts. And you're like, what the heck? I always freak out, like, Luke Acts? I don't know that Bible. Like, what happened? My confirmation teacher failed me. I don't know what book of the Bible is Luke Acts. What they're doing is they're saying really fast Luke and Acts. Because Luke and Acts are part 1 and part 2 of one story. Yeah. It's 2 movies, the first movie and the second movie. And as you all know who've watched movies or television shows or whatever, when you do a sequel, there's multiple ways you can start a sequel. You can start it actually as a prequel, where you go like back before the first movie and that leads in, or you can go 5 years later, or you can start it right after the last one, like the second after, and that's how Luke starts it. So the book of Luke ends with the men on the road to Emmaus, and Jesus reveals himself to him, and then Acts 1, Jesus gives him the command and says, go back to Jerusalem and wait. Go back and wait. That's the command that starts the church. But we have been taught that waiting is wasting and don't ever wait. But there is something true to it. Like, if you ever had to wait in an Apple store for a download of a new operating system and you just watch the thing, 1%, 2%, 3%, it's awful. So you have to wait with something. And so what I think really practically we have to do, and that this sends us into the world and is something more than just making affiliates, is that you always have to wait with a word, with a watchword, a way to wait. Wait, looking attentive for something. So I wonder if one of the things we do to help live into this is that our congregations and maybe our leaders need to help us figure out what is our watchword. What are we on watch for? And every congregation, I think, has their own kind of watchword. So let me give you just 2 examples. During the Civil Rights Movement, Martin Luther King Jr. found his watchword. In the midst of the bus boycotts in Montgomery not going well, he gets a phone call. There's a threat that they're going to bomb his house. He's got an infant sleeping, his child sleeping in the other room. He can't go back to sleep. He has his kitchen table experience where he realizes it's not going well. He confesses to God. He prays. He says, God, this is not going well. I am failing. This is not working well. This is not going well. And he hears God speak to him. And God says, Martin, when there is no way, I will make a way. And so this became, for the early civil rights movement, their watchword. Then he preaches in Chicago this beautiful sermon, the God of no way who makes a way. And the idea is we go on watch. And when there is no way, we start to anticipate God's going to move now. When we find ourselves at a place of no way, that's when we become very aware that God might move. So I know this really wonderful pastor who just retired. His name is Mike. Incredibly creative guy, great pastor. And he said, oh yeah, I always had a watchword. He said, I always had a watchword. He said, I didn't know to call it a watchword, but we always did. He said, first time I had a watchword, I was associate pastor at this church, and I was overseeing all the education, and I had just come out of seminary, and I was the most well-educated, smartest Christian education person I knew of. That's what he said. And he said, so I got all these Sunday school teachers on board. I gave them the lesson plan. I told them what to do. He said, except I had these 1 teachers, 7th graders. They taught 7th graders. And these 2 people teaching the 7th grade Sunday school class, they never do any of my lesson plans. And then I would find them in the weirdest places in the church. Like I would look into their room and they'd all be under the table, the 7th graders and these 2 people. And I'd find them in the boiler room. Their name was the Jurgensons. So the Jurgenson would take them into the boiler room. He said, I was so frustrated with the Jurgensons. They never did anything. He said, except then people started coming back for Christmas, like college students started coming back. And they'd always mention the Jurgensons, that they were looking for the Jurgensons. And he asked them, why do you look for the Jurgensons? And they started to say, well, ever since I've been in 7th grade, every year after that, on my birthday, the Jurgensons call me and sing happy birthday to me. Some of these people were in their mid-20s, and every birthday the Jurgensons had sung. And Mike was like, I'd like someone to call me and sing happy birthday to me. So he started to think, well, maybe these Jurgensons, maybe they're not that bad. So he talks to him and he says, hey, I just want to talk to them and figure out what you're doing. It's clear from these young adults that they are great Sunday school teachers. So he's like, hey, can I talk to you about what you're doing in Sunday school? And they're like, oh, we're so sorry, Pastor Mike. We're the worst Sunday school teachers ever. We're so bad. He's like, no, you're not. You're really not. He's like, well, I mean, I used to think that, but now I don't. Like, you're good. He's like, what do you do? What do you do? Like, no, we're terrible Sunday school teachers. So no, I don't think that. What do you do? He said, no, Pastor Mike, we're terrible Sunday school teachers because we only ever teach the kids one thing. I mean, you give us these great plans, but we can only teach the kids one thing, and all we ever teach them every week is nothing can separate you from the love of God. Nothing can separate you from the love of God. We try to teach something else, but all we do is teach this. Well, he comes to find out that the reason they do that is because they had a son, and he was a person with disabilities, and they had helped him through school and told him every night as they prayed for him, nothing can separate you from the love of God. Nothing can separate you from the love of God. Their son got through school, got married, became ill, and died. And then this sense of nothing could separate you from the love of God became incredibly poignant for them. And all they knew what to do was to teach these kids the very word of salvation they experienced. That in the deepest pain, nothing can separate you from the love of God. And that's all that they had done for the last 10 years teaching Sunday school. And Mike's like, that's brilliant. And so he started to preach it. They started to use it around their church. It became their watchword. Nothing can separate you from the love of God. And when people heard it, they knew the Jurgensen story. It was a shorthand for the way God had ministered to the Jurgensens. So they put it up in banners during Lent. Nothing can separate from the love of God. They preached on it. They talked about it all the time. And he said, then we had a mother in our church. We still, to this day, don't know what happened. But she had 2 small children, and she committed suicide. We have no idea why. Maybe she had Lyme disease or something something went on. We had no idea. But he said, I had to preach that sermon. And I preached, nothing can separate you from the love of God. And it just formed the community. And I wonder if part of what we do is we wait on watch. And that takes theological reflection. It takes seminaries to help pastors be able to hear stories and formulate watchwords for the community to hold on to. But it really is a shorthand of the community's experience of God, that God moves in the community in this way. So it demands we listen to one another, but it demands then we send each other out into the world with this watchword to watch where God is. Another one I know that I've tried to write on is a church community that a watchword, we follow Jesus into sorrow. Their idea was that Jesus is present in experiences of sorrow, and it sent lay people out to be on watch for where there was sorrow. And where there was sorrow, they went, because they expected Jesus Christ to be moving there, because Jesus Christ binds himself to those who are sorrowful. So they had this kind of story to be on watch for how God was moving in their life, and the congregation became the place where they told the stories of where they saw God on watch. But it took the kind of theological imagination to do that. So I don't know what it specifically looks like in our church. I don't know what it means for our buildings, but I do know that we're narrative creatures that need these stories that we hold on to. We need to tell them, we need to have them, and I wonder if that, to me, that's a practical way forward, but it isn't a program, and it isn't 8 steps. It's what does it mean to hold these stories and have someone in leadership synthesize them to say, it seems like at this time, God moves in our congregation this way. When there's no way, God finds a way. Or nothing can separate us from the love of God. And really practically, Mike always said, when you're talking to people and you hear them say things that sound like Bible verses, hold on to that. Be aware of that. It means God might be moving in that way. I think we're getting pulled off stage.
I think so.
I think that's a big hook. That says we've had enough. So.